Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mental Junk Food. I'm your host, CB Smallwood, and this is the place where we talk about all things comics, sci-fi, horror, fantasy, pop culture, and everything in between. And today, we're going to do it all. We're going to talk about George Romero. We're going to talk about zombies. We're going to talk about coronavirus and just everything in between. And we're going to talk about how George Romero, on how he infected and all that stuff, how he's had such an impact on society for various reasons. I believe 2020 will be a year that will go down in history as one that will be studied by historians and epidemiologists alike for decades to come. And it's as a result of the spread of the coronavirus pandemic and, to even greater extent, the worldwide reaction to it. So what does the coronavirus have to do with George Romero? Well, first, let's talk about what it is and a little bit how it got started. The coronavirus is actually a family of viruses that cause disease in animals. Now, there's like 7 of these, according to the Centers for Disease Control, including the new virus, the one that we're dealing with right now, called COVID-19, which that's pretty high-tech sounding. Coronavirus can go from being a virus in animals to making the jump to humans. Most of these just cause cold-like symptoms. A person can be infected with COVID-19 with no symptoms for around 10 days. Initial symptoms of coronavirus include fever, dry cough, tiredness, and a general feeling of being unwell. So how did the outbreak start? Well, the source of the coronavirus is believed to be a wet market somewhere in Wuhan, China, which sold both dead and live animals, including fish and birds. Such markets pose a heightened risk of viruses jumping from animals to humans because hygiene standards are difficult to maintain, especially if live animals are being kept and butchered on site. Typically, these are densely packed, and just think lots of poop and pee. Now, I know this is a lot of information to kind of take in, but trust me, folks, I have to cover this. Otherwise, the whole point of the video is kind of, moot. Well, anyway, the animal source of the latest outbreak has not yet been identified, but the original host is thought to be bats. Bats were not sold at the Wuhan market, but have infective live chicken or other animals sold there, but may have. On a quick side note, scientists in China believe that the COVID-19 virus has mutated into 2 strains, one more aggressive than the other, which could make developing a vaccine more complicated. So there you have it. That's essentially what the coronavirus is, where it came from, and the symptoms to the best of my knowledge. For better details and proper information, check with your local doctor, because as with any YouTuber, we tend to talk more out of our butts than our heads sometimes. So, don't say I didn't tell you so. Now, it's time to answer the bigger question, what does this have to do with George Romero? Well, George Romero, first off, is a great director who has made films such as The Crazies.
Ace, please, man, please.
What's the matter, Emilio? Afraid I'll make a stink? Come on!
It's time to answer the bigger question, what does this have to do with George Romero? Well, George Romero, first off, is a great director who has made films such as The Crazies, or was it The Night of the Crazies? Oh, whatever. The Crazies, Martin, Monkey Shines, and Creep Show. But he's most remembered as the father of the zombie genre, having filmed such classics as Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and at least 3 more dead films or zombie films that don't get as much praise because, they were released more in the later millennium, Of course, George Romero wasn't the first to make zombie or zombie-like films. There was 1932's White Zombie that dealt with Haitian zombies starring Bela Lugosi. In 1943, you had I Walked with a Zombie. In 1945, Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space. 1964's The Last Man on Earth starring the cryptic Vincent Price, which, by the way, is a really good movie that would go on to garner 2 more remakes. I believe one was called The Omega Man and I Am Legend that had Will Smith in it. In 1966, we had the Plague of the Zombies which I think that might have been a Hammer film. I'm not for sure. And I'm sure there's much, much more that I missed. Having said that, the modern zombie owes its heart and soul to George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which was released in 1968. Romero's zombie represented a great unknown. It was the monster that could be anyone, anywhere, and at any time. It could be your friend, it could be your neighbor, it could be a stranger, or even your family. What made his film so endearing with audiences is you didn't know what the origin story of the Romero zombies was, or when it could end, or if it would end. His zombie films were horror films with no happy endings. Instead, stories were more about choices we make as individuals when faced with a crisis. Do we rise above? Do we hide or run away? Do we pretend nothing is wrong and carry on with life as is? Or do we let the crisis bring out the worst in ourselves? That, in a nutshell, is what makes George Romero's zombie movies so great. A series of what-ifs that brings up broader and more personal questions of what would I do in that situation? Since those early Romero films, the zombie genre continued to grow in popularity. Other filmmakers took the premise and the themes found in those films and made their own. Some with, some mixed results, others with great success. For example, there is 1979's Zombie 2, made by Lucio Fulci, which might be considered part of the Italian horror genre giallo. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, giallo. Then there are films like 1985's The Return of the Living Dead, based off of John Russo's novel by the same name, who, by the way, worked with George Romero on Night of the Living Dead. Now, Return of the Living Dead is one of my favorite films, and if you haven't seen it, you really need to go and do yourself a solid and watch it now. You can pause this video and then come back. Anyway, we also had 28 Days Later in 2002, then the sequel of 28 Weeks Later, which come sometime later, which focused on the idea of a zombie apocalypse being one not of the undead, but caused rather by a virus. Now, folks, I know I'm skipping a few zombie movies, but I'm mainly focusing on more of the more notable ones, okay? Also in 2002, we had Resident Evil, if I'm not mistaken, whose source material was based off the very popular series of games by the same name. Even though it was a good movie, it was more action-based than horror-based. I mean, the first one had more horror in it than the later films, but each sequel thereafter became more and more action-centric. Interesting side note, George Romero was initially slated to direct this movie, but it didn't work out. So imagine George Romero doing the first Resident Evil movie. We kind of missed out on that. Anyway, it wasn't until 2004's remake of George Romero's Dawn of the Dead that, in my humble opinion, is when the zombie genre started to become mainstream. It was so well done, it captured all the best elements of the original film, but I would argue it added better pacing and kept more of the tension throughout the film when compared to 1979's Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead remake grossed somewhere around $102 million worldwide against a budget of $26 million. Now, after this, there was an explosion of zombie films. Most of which were terrible, to be honest, with a few gems sprinkled here and there. Too many to list, and that's probably better suited for another video. So, sometime later, here comes Robert Kirkman with The Walking Dead. Now, I'm not going to get into talking about the comics on this, as I'm struggling as is to get back to my main point. Instead, I want to focus on AMC television series, which made its TV debut on October 31st of 2010. The Walking Dead has been nominated for several awards, including the Writers Guild of America Award for New Series and the Golden Globe Award for Best Television Series, I think in the drama category. And at its height in popularity, it had roughly about 17 million viewers watching the show. Can you imagine 17 million people sitting down on a weekly basis on Sunday nights to watch zombies. Think about that. Let that sink in. The Walking Dead brought the zombie apocalypse to everyone's home weekly on Sunday nights. The show was so popular that it created two spin-offs, The Talking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead. With that said, zombies became mainstream. The history lesson over what has been the impact on society in terms of how people act, think, and respond to pandemics. Because, as noted earlier, the zombie genre kind of shifted from being about things that were undead to things that are infected. Even though you could go all the way back to what is it, the I Am Legend, or the Last Man on Earth. I can't remember what it's called. They had Vincent Price in it, where basically everyone was suffering from an infectious disease that caused them to become killers. Anyway, back on topic. I like to think that most people are not as prone to panic when pandemics break out as a result of zombie films, as they became part of pop culture. Many of you may disagree with me on this point, but hear me out. Sure, you can find examples online, on the news, and maybe where you live. Well, I guess you can find examples everywhere. But most people seem to be responding with care and caution these days as it concerns the coronavirus. Not to say that there isn't a shortage of toilet paper, which I'm sure new zombie films may have to include that little tidbit for the sake of accuracy. But still, since zombies went mainstream, there have been many shows online and even on television that talk about doomsday scenarios and how to survive them, such as Doomsday Preppers. Remember that show? It aired on National Geographic Channel from 2011 to 2014. There's also History Channel's Alone, where hand-selected survivalists compete for $500,000 over who can live the longest on the shores of Vancouver Island with roaming grizzly bears and wolves and other creatures of the night and day. $500,000. That research in that can't be accurate. $500,000? Really? Anyway, Naked and Afraid. That was on Discovery Channel. In this challenge, contestants may strip naked and are paired up with someone of the opposite sex who they never met to live the next week together in a hostile environment of some type. There's also the Dual Survival on Discovery Channel. This series features two people from different backgrounds, usually one who is more natural and the other one that's more militant, and puts them in various situations all over the world. There are several more shows that deal with survival. I know that on the surface it doesn't seem that it's zombie related, but the zombie genre is all about survival. That's one of the key elements in it. And I dare say that a lot of these shows wouldn't be as popular and wouldn't be as big without first the zombie genre kind of breaking down those barriers and breaking down those doors for them. Heck, even radio has been infected, I would dare say, by zombies going mainstream, in my humble opinion. There's a couple of conservative, and I guess you would say a few far-right talk shows that are sponsored by doomsday prepper companies that sell, I guess, dry goods, dried food, water purifiers, probably gas masks, but I don't want to say that for sure without knowing. You name it, they probably got it. So a lot of these shows are sponsored by doomsday prepper companies. I think people, not just in the U.S., but also worldwide, have been affected by what they have seen in zombie movies. People are more conscientious about the potential of virus outbreaks, the panic that can happen when they do, and the need to be prepared in terms of supplies and having a plan. Now, I'm not saying everyone, but I think there's a growing number of people that are responding in kind because of zombie movies. I think people are also more likely to take serious news headlines about disease and illness than what they once did. The best way I could compare it to is what zombie movies have done to make people more conscientious about pandemics and viruses. I would argue is kind of like the same thing that happened on 9/11 where people who, in the United States in particular, people in the United States who were kind of more insular and were worried about their day-to-day life were forced on that horrific day to actually start watching more of the news and actually learning more about the world around them. And I don't say that as an insult or anything like that. It's just, people became a little bit more broader minded about things that were going on. But kind of getting back to the original topic, talking about zombies and pandemics, George Romero and stuff like that. One other thing to think about is, it's with the awareness that I think Americans and citizens of the world have about pandemics than what they used to, and I'm probably gleaming some of the survival information from the zombie genre. I just like to say that, Westerners in particular, Americans, probably not, going to go out and get face masks like the Japanese do out of courtesy when somebody has the common cold. But it wouldn't surprise me if in the future it would be more socially accepted than not. Some other little tidbit I want to throw in this video is like President Trump recently at one of his press briefings spoke in length about changing the habit of shaking hands as a result of the coronavirus. That makes me think, will the coronavirus be the start of the eroding of the cultural practice of handshakes in the Western world? I don't think so. But you never know how things could change. On a somewhat sad or negative aspect not often talked about is there are Chinese small business owners and restaurants in the U.S. that are struggling as a result of the coronavirus due to the fact that this strain had originated from China. Because of that, there are people who are staying away from said businesses. On one hand, one certainly could argue with a few facts that are known about this virus that this is a common sense measure taken by people trying to protect themselves and their families by just staying home, not going to restaurants that may have Chinese workers, as bad as that may sound. On the other hand, this could be purely a fear-based decision on the part of some people. You could look at it either way, and to each their own, no judgment either way. But back to the topic of zombies. Currently, as of March 15th, 2020, you can see the search term of zombie apocalypse is becoming more and more frequent or popular in Google Trends. In my opinion, there's no way George Romero's dead films have not had an impact on society in some way or another. And I think that impact is only going to deepen in the future as other filmmakers expand on the zombie genre. We're going to see people respond either with more urgency and more calm or even prepare better before a crisis as a result of social conditioning and influence of George Romero's films. Whenever I do these videos, I try to offer a different perspective on a particular topic, though I do confess there are times where I probably sound more like a parrot citing other people's opinions that I also happen to share. A good comics analogy would be that no one wants to hear what Ben Reilly has to say because, if they want to know what Spider-Man thinks, then they would ask Peter Parker, right? Well, I guess that non-funny, over-your-head clone jokes aside, I hope you appreciate what it is that I'm trying to get across in this video, or at the very least, it is food for thought, or better yet, mental junk food. With that said, videos like this take time to make. Please show your support by hitting like and subscribe so you can get more videos like this. So do you think George Romero had an impact on how our society views viruses, outbreaks, and pandemics? Do you think the coronavirus is an overblown bunch of phooey, or is it something to be concerned about? You folks tend to be a lot more articulate and thoughtful than I am. Let me know in the comments section down below. I enjoy, appreciate, and read each and every single one. As always, this is CB Smallwood, and I will see you in the next video. Unless I'm dead, then you can watch my old videos and have what's left of my toilet paper.